Hello, this is Morel Bernard with the continuing story of an American Booker T. Washington, the life story of Booker T. Washington. And last words were that as soon as the building period slackens, we shall be able to send out a larger number skilled in all the branches of agriculture. So, and by the way, please subscribe to these videos and please share. Much appreciated. I have been asked many times about the progress of the students in the night school as compared with those in the day school. In reality, there is little difference. A student who studies 2 hours at night and works with his hands 10 hours during the day naturally covers less ground in the textbooks than the day student. Yet in real sound growth and the making of manhood, I question whether the day student has much advantage over the student in the night school. There is an indescribable something about work with the hands that tends to develop a student's mind. The night school students take up their studies with a degree of enthusiasm and alertness that is not equalled in the day classes. I have known instances where students seemed so dull or stupid that he made practically no progress in the study of books. He was away from the books entirely for a few months and put to work at a trade. At the end of a few months, he has returned to the classroom, and it has been surprising to note how much more easily he could master the textbooks than before. There is something, I think, in the handling of a tool that has the same relation to close, accurate thinking that writing with a pen has in the preparation of a manuscript. Nearly all persons who write will agree, I think, that one can produce much more satisfactory work by using the pen than by dictation. While speaking of the effect of careful hand training on the development of character, it is worthwhile to mention an uncommonly instructive example. If anyone goes into a community, north or south, and asks to have pointed out to him the man of the Negro race of the old generation who stands for the best things in life of the colored community, in 6 cases out of 10, I venture to say he will be shown a man who learned a trade during the days of slavery. A few years ago, James Hale, a Negro, died in Montgomery, Alabama. He spent the greater part of his life as a slave. He left property valued at $50,000 and bequeathed a generous sum to be used in providing for an infirmary for the benefit of his race. James Hale could not read or write a line, yet I do not believe that there is a white or black man in Montgomery who knew Mr. Hale who would not agree with me in saying that he was the first colored citizen of Montgomery. I have seldom met a man of any race who surpassed him in sterling qualities. When Mr. Hale was a slave, his master took great pains to have him well trained as a carpenter, contractor, and builder. His master saw that the better the slave was trained in handicraft, the more dollars he was worth. In my opinion, it was this hand training, despite the evil of slavery, that largely resulted in Mr. Hale's fine development. If Mr. Hale was all this with mere hand training, what might he have been if his mind had also been carefully educated? Mr. Hale was simply a type of many men to be found in nearly every part of the country. The average manual training school has for its main object the imparting of culture to the student, while the economic element is made secondary. At the Tuskgee Institute, we have always emphasized the trade or economic side of education. With any ignorant and poverty-stricken race, I believe that the problem of breadwinning should precede that of culture. For this reason, the students who have attended the night school at Tuskegee have, as a rule, mastered the principles and practice of agriculture, or have been taught a trade by means of which we felt sure they could earn a living. With the question of shelter, food, and clothing settled, there is a basis for what are considered the higher and more important things. We have therefore emphasized the earning value of education rather than the finished manual training, being careful at the same time to lay the foundations of thorough moral, mental, and religious instruction. In following this method, something may be lost of the accuracy and finish which could be obtained if a course in manual training preceded the industrial course, but the fact that the student is taught the principle of house building in building a real house and not a playhouse gives him a self-reliance and confidence in his ability to make a living that manual training alone could not give. The boy in the conditions surrounding the average Negro youth, leaving school with manual training alone, finds himself little better off than he was before, so far as his immediate and pressing problem of earning a living is concerned. He and those dependent upon him want at once food, shelter, clothing, and the opportunity to live properly in a home. Industrial education takes into consideration the economic element in production in a way that manual training does not. And this is of great value to a race just beginning its career. While I'm speaking of the comparative value of manual training and industrial education, there is one other difference between them to which I ought to call attention. The proportion of students who complete an industrial or trade course is likely to be smaller than the proportion completing a literary or manual training course. For example, a boy comes to Tuskgee Institute, as has often happened, from a district where he has been earning, say, 50 cents a day. At Tuskegee, he works at the brick mason's trade for 9 months. He cannot master the trade during this time, but he gets a start in it. At the end of the 9-month session, if he returns home, this student finds himself in demand in the community at wages which range from $1.50 to $2 a day. Unless he is a man of extraordinary strong character, he will be likely to yield to the temptation to remain at home and become a rather commonplace mason instead of returning and finishing his trade in order that he may become a master workman. So far, I have been unable to discover any remedy that will completely offset this tendency. The most effective cure for it, so far as my experience is concerned, is an appeal to the pride of the student. Another question often asked me is how long it will take an industrial school to become self-supporting. To this question, I always reply that I know of no industrial school that is self-supporting, nor do I believe that any school which performs its highest functions as an industrial school will become so. I believe that it is the duty of all such schools to make the most of the economic element, to make each industry pay in dollars and cents just as far as is possible. But the element of teaching should be made the first consideration, and the element of production secondary. Very often at the Tuskgee Institute, it would pay the institution better to keep a boy away from the farm than to have him spend a day at work on it. But the farm is for the boy, and not the boy for the farm. An industrial school is continually at work on raw material. When a student gets to the point where he can build a first-class wagon or buggy, he is not retained at the school to build these vehicles merely for their economic value, but is sent out into the world to begin his life's work. And another student is taken in his place to begin the work afresh. The cost of teaching the new student and the waste of material weigh heavily against the cost of production. Hence, it can easily be seen that it is an almost impossible task to make money out of an industrial school or to make it self-supporting. The moment the idea of make it pay is placed uppermost, the institution becomes a factory and not a school for training head and hand and heart. One of the advantages of the night school at Tuskegee is in the sifting out process of the student body. Unless a student has real grit in him and mean business, he will not continue very long to work with his hands 10 hours a day for the privilege of studying 2 hours at night. Though much of the work done by students at an industrial school like Tuskegee does not pay, the mere effort at self-help on the part of the student is of the greatest value in character building. Most races have come up through contact with the soil, either directly or indirectly. There is something about the smell of the soil, a contact with a reality that gives one a strength and development that can be gained in no other way. In advocating industrial training for backward or weak races or individuals, I've always kept in mind the strengthening influence of contact with a real thing, rather than with a third-rate imitation of the thing. The great lesson which the race needs to learn in freedom is to work willingly, cheerfully, and efficiently. In laying special stress upon hand training for a large proportion of my race, I ask no peculiar education for the Negro, because he is a Negro, but I would advocate the same training for the German, the Jew, or the Frenchman, were he in the same relative stage of racial development as the masses of the Negroes. While insisting upon thorough and high-grade industrial education for a large proportion of my race, I've always had the greatest sympathy with first-class college training and have recognized the fact that the Negro race, like other races, must have thoroughly trained college men and women. There is a place and a work for such, just as there is a place and a work for those thoroughly trained with their hands. No, I shall never forget a remark I once heard made by a lady of foreign birth. She had recently arrived in America and by chance had landed in one of our largest American cities. As she was a woman of considerable importance, she received lavish social attention for weeks. Her life was spent in a round of fashionable dressing, dining, automobiling, balls, theatres, art museums, card parties, and what not. When she was quite worn out, a friend took her to visit the Hampton Normal and Agricultural Institute. There she saw students and teachers at work in the soil, in wood, in metal, in leather, at work cooking, sewing, laundering. She saw a company of the most devoted men and women in the world giving their lives in the most unselfish manner that they might help to put a race on its feet. It was then that she exclaimed in my presence, "What a relief! Here I have found a reality, and I'm so glad that I did not leave America before I saw it." I think I was able to understand something of her feeling. In the history of the Negro race, since freedom, one of the most difficult tasks has been to teach the teachers and leaders to exercise enough patience and foresight to keep the race down to a reality, instead of yielding to the temptations to grasp after shadows and superficialities. But the race itself is learning the lesson very fast. Indeed, the rank and file learn faster than some of the teachers and leaders. Broom making has been recently included among the industries for girls at Tuskegee. Hundreds of brooms were being worn out every year in sweeping the floors of more than 70 buildings, and I venture to say that more brooms were used up for the same amount of floor space than at almost any other institution of the kind. Whenever you may go in the shops or halls, you will find someone busy with a broom most of the time. The litter in the carpenter's shop or the mattress-making room is not allowed to accumulate until the end of the day, but is swept up so often that visitors sometimes ask me whether there is a moment of the working day when someone is not wielding a busy broom somewhere in the institution. It was this reason that inspired the home manufacture of the needed supply of brooms. It had been found possible to supply most of the needs of the school by student labor. And after establishing a summer canning factory, which Chaplain Penny directs while the Bible school is not in session, making brooms seemed a natural evolution of supply and demand. But investigations showed that none of the instructors knew anything about making brooms, and that the experimental farm had not yet taken up the task of raising broom corn. These obstacles were not serious in comparison with many others which had been attacked in the industrial school. A way was found to make the first sample broom, and gradually the needed machinery was installed. Then the director of the agriculture department discovered that broom corn could be raised on the farm, and now students can be equipped to take the industrial knowledge home with them and also to grow the crop on their own farms. This department keeps the school supplied with good brooms at small cost, and out of a minor need grew another useful industry. The lesson in this little story is that finding a way to solve the problems closer at home helps to build up the community at large. It was found also that the work of the classroom could be correlated even with broom making and made to harmonize with the Tuskegee theory of education of head and hands together. The girls were asked to write composition descriptive of their work in this industry, and some of these efforts have been very creditable. Join me for the next video of an American, Booker T. Washington. Join me for the next video on the life of Working with Hands, Booker T. Washington. Join me for the next video. So, Morale saying bye-bye for now.